Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And once again I'm going to talk about how we are definitely not past peak woke, because we are still being asked to ignore our lying eyes. Now what am I talking about this time? Well, the classic complaints that there was two-tier policing during the 2024 summer riots is baseless, a report finds. Police response to disorder after Southport attack was entirely appropriate, says Home Affairs Committee. Now, the thing is that there was some appropriate retaliation from the police to rioters. Police are there to, say, stop fires at hotels. They are also there to stop mass violence, which there definitely was. However, they obviously also overstepped their mark by getting people like Peter Lynch, who was just shouting at the police, put into jail. And of course, Lucy Connolly was put into jail for, well, frankly, having quite a bit of an emotional reaction to the whole thing, saying mass deportation burned down hotels and instantly deleting it, because it technically did break the Malicious Communications Act 2003. However, she's ended up in jail for 31 months and, according to recent reports, is actually being blocked from even seeing her own daughter, which is very much only something you'd see from, let's say, someone who looks like this. I think that's the way I'd put it. So MPs considered accusations that riots were policed more strongly than previous protests, but said the claims of two-tier policing were baseless. Parliament's Home Affairs Cross-Party Select Committee published a report on Monday into police response to the disorder that broke out across the country after the murder of 3 girls and the attempted murder of 7 others, was it 8 others, at the Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport on 29 July. The report found that there was no evidence of two-tier policing in the way officers responded to violence and criminality that erupted in Southport and later elsewhere, branding the claims as disgraceful. It wasn't a protest, MP said. Those participating in disorder were not policed more strongly because of their supposed political views, but because they were throwing missiles and assaulting police officers and committing arson. Yes, but they were also arresting people who were simply there recording things. You know, where's that article? So yeah, there were stories of a care worker who live-streamed a group of masked and hooded men making racist comments on TikTok after the riot in Staffordshire had been jailed for 9 months. Cameron Bell, 23, was caught on CCTV wearing her work uniform as about 20 people, many armed with planks of wood that appeared to be lengths of metal, walked through Tamworth on the night of 4th of August. Stafford Crown Court heard Bell was not present during violence earlier the same day at the town's Holiday Inn Express, which was set alight in the disorder. John Edwards, judge, said Bell's comments on the livestream were abhorrent and had the potential to fan the flames. Rejecting calls for a suspended sentence, anyone involved in violent disorder must command immediate custody, and the need for deterrence to be acute. And yes, she was heard swearing while referring to asylum seekers as tramps. That's what got her put in jail, by the way. If you want to see two-tier policing, we currently have an MP. Is he an MP anymore, or did he resign? Runcorn, anyway, that MP or ex-MP, punched a constituent in the face and got a suspended sentence for a 10-week jail sentence. This woman was put into jail for 9 months for calling some people tramps on social media. Yet again, I'm not buying this. There was no two-tier policing. Now, it does say at the bottom that she did plead guilty to violent disorder, and I mean, to be quite frank with you, I don't think she should have done that, but it's very unclear what type of advice these people actually got while they were being arrested and all that, because it's never been clear to me why so many of them pled guilty. And honestly, that might be part of the reason they're saying there's no two-tier justice, because, oh, you fight this, you win most of the time, because, you know, how can you possibly go to jail for recording a live stream on TikTok where you don't actually do anything? Okay, she called some people tramps. Oh well, get over it. Because, you know, I've done videos on the Southport riots before, obviously, and I was quite clear then, anyone doing any violence should be put in jail. That is absolutely fair, that is fine, that is good, in fact. That is justice. Shouldn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, shouldn't matter the colour of your skin, etc, 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 etc. Go to jail if you did violence. Was anyone put in jail for attacking that pub? Again, just go back to my old videos on Southport, you'll see video footage of all this. You know, there was also a community police officer telling a load of masked up men, go back to your mosque and put your weapons away. It's an offence to carry an offensive weapon in public, and yet they were. Were any of them arrested? No, they were told to put them back. And I'm being told to believe that there was no two tiers here. Anyway, back to that point. Anyway, the Times were a bit more critical on the report here. Southport Riots, conflicting advice, let misinformation spread, MPs say. Merseyside Police wanted to make public the fact the killer was not a Muslim asylum seeker in an attempt to stop false beliefs setting off violence. Yes, that would have been very helpful, but you kept a lid on it, didn't you? Why? Oh, because we need to control the narrative. Well, you didn't, and, well, frankly, misinformation spread like wildfire. You know, no pun intended with that picture either. So the Home Affairs Committee said that inconsistent advice from the CPS about whether to publicly reveal Rudy Kobama's Christian background created an information vacuum that allowed this information to flourish. Well, obviously. I don't know why they hid it. Well, in fact, I think I do know why they hid it. I think it's because they thought, oh, no one's going to believe that. They're not going to believe he was Christian. And his family was Christian. Whether Rudy Kobama was, I don't know. However, it is questionable given he had an Al-Qaeda manual. The report acknowledged that the false belief that the suspect was an asylum seeker was the cause of the disorder that followed the murder of 3 girls at the Taylor Swift dance-themed party, etc., etc. I mean, the funny thing is that his family was an asylum-seeking family. His father and mother were both from Rwanda during the genocide, and they did come over as refugees. So he himself wasn't a refugee. His parents were, though, which really doesn't make that much of a difference to many people's minds. To many people's minds, he's still an asylum seeker because he came from a family that were asylum seekers, and in a country that is not obviously their home country, which is Rwanda. The authorities were unable to identify Rwanda publicly because he was under 18 at the time of the attack, and misinformation suggests that he was an asylum seeker named Ali Shakati, who had arrived by boat in 2023, began to spread. And yeah, it was all nonsense, and I was of the cohort of people saying, let's not jump to conclusions. I know we all want this to be the case, frankly, because it gives us a really good excuse to go on about boat people again, but let's wait till information's out. Yes, it's taking a while. Yes, I think that's stupid, but the guy's under 18. I doubt a boat person came over under the age of 18. Anyway, the mainstream don't mention this for some reason. I guess they don't find it relevant information, though I do find it relevant information. So instead I'm having to cite Unheard, and I do recommend this article because it goes through an awful lot of examples of two-tier policing during the Southport riots. I'm obviously mentioning them off the cuff, but this one has a lot more detail. But I want to go into the actual report, but I think it's first good to indicate that this report was done by a Home Affairs Committee which included 7 Labour MPs, 2 Lib Dems and 2 Conservatives. And they declared that it was disgraceful to see police officers who bore the brunt of the violence being undermined by baseless claims of two-tier policing. Again, 7 Labour, 2 Lib Dem, 2 Tory. And again, once again actually, I'm having to say, isn't it obvious why people have trust issues with the Tories? They are on the side of the establishment here, yet again. It is the most obvious case of two-tier policing that I think we've ever seen, and all the information's out there because of all the video clips that I myself have reported on, along with plenty of other people, not just on the online right, but also on things like GB News and things like that. Like, this stuff's obvious. And yet, Tories will still be on committees trying to cover this whole thing up. So yeah, I've got trust issues with them. Anyway, let's get into the report. So let's take a look at the summary. The disorder which took place in July and August 2024 shocked the country, as did the appalling murder of Bebe King, Elise Dot Stancombe and Alice da Silva Aguera, which preceded it. The events marked the worst disorder since 2011 and were alarming for the violence and targeted nature, with the scenes of rioters trying to break into asylum hotels, attacking mosques, community centres and libraries. The reason for the community centres and libraries is because they're typically used as effectively asylum processing places, or community spaces for, obviously, the asylum seekers. The level of violence meted out by the police officers was deplorable. Yes, there were plenty of bricks, rocks and other missiles thrown at the police, and obviously police vans were set on fire. That is, of course, deplorable. Though the attack on mosques, I think I'm going to need to look at the detail of that, because from videos that I saw, effectively, the mosque itself didn't particularly get attacked, though bricks were obviously taken from the wall in front, as bricks were taken from walls in front of residents around the mosque as well, basically to be used as missiles against the police. The police absolutely got most of the ire here, and there were, of course, videos of some rioters dragging people out of cars who were not the same colour as their skin, we'll say. And that is, of course, the only direct kind of evidence I have that this was a race-based riot, but the rest of it seemed to be very much we hate the police, or people randomly being opportunists and robbing Greggs, for example. This was not a protest. The riots certainly weren't. There were protests going on, though. Those participating in disorder were not policed more strongly because of their supposed political views, but because they were throwing missiles, assaulting police officers, and committing arson. I'm sorry, but again, some people were arrested for calling people tramps. I'm not having that as the full picture. There were indeed people who threw missiles, assaulted police, and committed arson. They do deserve jail. But that is not where the remit of the police stopped that day. It was disgraceful to see the police officers who bore the brunt of this violence being undermined by baseless claims of two-tier policing. Well, it happened. Again, I'm going to get the clip, actually.
This mosque, this small group. If there's any weapons or anything like that, what I would do is discard them in the mosque, leave them here. And you don't give anybody any reason or have any interaction with the police, negative interaction. That's my belief. If there's any weapons, get rid of them. You're not going to arrest anybody. I've been told that
Now, granted, it's not the easiest clip to understand in the world, but he does directly say that if anyone has any weapons or anything like that, store them in the mosque because it gives the police less reason to arrest you. This is a police liaison officer giving prior warning to an entire group of people who are obviously Muslim, because he says store them in the mosque, that basically give them forewarning that if you are already committing a crime by having offensive weapons on you, go and store them in the mosque. It worries me that the police appear to know that weapons are being stored in mosques and they don't want to do anything about it. Once again, two-tier policing claim very much front and centre here. Was the girl live streaming warned that if she called people tramps she'd be arrested and put in jail for 9 months? No. She still pled guilty for God knows what reason. Were people who posted things online, obviously they were eventually warned, but before they were warned, no, you end up in jail for 31 months. It's just crazy how all this can happen. While at the time it was happening, there were people on TikTok fanning the flames, from both sides to be quite frank. It wasn't just people on the rioters that were blatantly everywhere's side on TikTok, it was also, frankly, people asking others to defend themselves. Again, Nick Lowe's is another example, actually. He just spread misinformation that there was an acid attack against a Muslim woman, and then there were Muslims out with weaponry saying, I heard that there was an acid attack on one of us, so I'm here to defend ourselves. Did Nick Lowe's end up going to jail? Did any of the MPs who retweeted him? No, of course they didn't. Again, though, totally not two-tier policing going on. Thanks to the efforts of thousands of police officers, many of whom suffered serious injuries, the disorder was quelled swiftly and loss of life was averted, yet the effectiveness of welfare provisions for individual police officers varied significantly, including some officers going without water or food for hours and some injured officers having to convey themselves to hospital. The event, well, it was a mass disorder, to be fair. The event also highlighted shortcomings in national policing structures, which meant that individual forces were not able to access the support they needed, and the government and police leaders did not always have an accurate picture of what was happening on the ground. I can understand that. It was chaos. The government intervened in August to support police forces to respond to the disorder and have since announced a white paper to deliver major reforms to national policing structures in England. We expect the government to be ambitious in its proposals to increase effectiveness of our police forces and support them to rebuild trust. But the disorder also demonstrated that effective policing relies on a supportive criminal justice system in order to prosecute crimes and imprison offenders. Are you telling me that didn't happen? There was a woman in jail for 9 months for calling people tramps. What are you talking about? The government acted in the summer to make sure that its support was in place, but wider problems remain in the courts and the prison estate in the government's ambitions for reducing crime, which will require better long-term alignment between Home Office policies on crime policing and those of the Ministry of Justice related to criminal justice system. To be honest, the rest of that summary isn't particularly bad. I do want to very much focus on why they are saying that the two-tier policing claim is bogus, so let's skip to that. So, two-tier policing. During the disorder, the police began to face accusations of two-tier policing, suggesting that those involved in disorder had been policed more strongly than previous protesters. In particular, some drew parallel with Black Lives Matter in 2020, which saw some violent clashes, particularly in London. And for example, allegations of two-tier policing were made by the far-right activist Tommy Robinson and the former GB News presenter and founder of the Reclaim Party, Lawrence Fox, on X during the disorder receiving widespread attention. Are we seriously going to try and start claiming that because people that we don't like started claiming this, that means it's not true? Because don't get me wrong, I like neither of those people, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. Robinson had accused the police of being soft-handed with Black Lives Matter. The parallels with Black Lives Matter and the accusations of the two-tier policing were subsequently echoed by mainstream commentators in The Telegraph and The Spectator. See, this is the narrative they're trying to build up here. Again, 7 Labour MPs, 2 Lib Dems, 2 Tories wrote this. You got to bear in mind this is what they are trying to do. They're trying to say, oh, they're just echoing what mentalists like Lawrence Fox and Tommy Robinson are saying. That's all they're doing here. When in reality, I read an awful lot of articles at the time on two-tier policing. Neither The Telegraph or The Spectator would cite either of those people, so that's just nonsense. Following the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Black Lives Matter took place across the world, including the UK. According to statements made by the then Home Secretary, the Right Honourable Dame Priti Patel MP, across the weekends of 6th to 7th of June 2020 and 13th to 14th of June 2020, more than 210,000 people attended 360 Black Lives Matter protests in the UK. The majority of the protests were described as peaceful, although violence developed in London on 6 June 2020 when missiles and flares were thrown at police officers outside Downing Street, and yes, a woman even, I think, broke a whole bunch of ribs after being clotheslined off a horse by a road sign. It was pretty brutal, to be honest. On 13th of June 2020, significant disorder occurred in London and elsewhere following counter-protests, which the Home Secretary then described as being led by racist and far-right hooligans. This will be the reaction crowd, I guess I'll call them. And again, I covered this too, and even back then, two-tier policing was being thrown about because, let's be fair, it was absolutely what was happening. Black Lives Matter, yes, they had some arrests, but you had a bit of chaos with the horses, and at the end of the day, from what I remember, hardly anyone got arrested at the Black Lives Matter ones. As soon as you had these far-right hooligans, as the Home Secretary described them at the time, there were more organised police lines, people were being taken off to be arrested, etc, etc, etc. In fact, you had the police kneeling to the Black Lives Matter protests, and absolutely no respect whatsoever to far-right hooligans. Like, of course there's two-tier policing. 38 officers were reported to have been injured, having been kicked, punched or pelted with missiles, and 137 arrests were made on 13th of June for offence including assaults on officers, violent disorders and possession of offensive weapons. Why are we getting no details in this report of the Black Lives Matter protests when it comes to this? Oh, the Black Lives Matter protests were mostly peaceful, to be fair they were. Okay, how many were arrested in London? No idea, they don't mention it. Funny that. The Home Secretary stated that many of the so-called protesters came with the deliberate intent of causing harm to those around them and the police officers. Overall, 360 protests took place during Black Lives Matter protests compared to the 250 protests or events which took place during the 2024 disorder. Despite these being of comparable scale, the 2024 disorder led to 1,804 arrests to date and saw 302 police officers injured compared to the 135 arrests and 35 to police officers during the Black Lives Matter protests. If we're using that as a comparison, as they are here, that means about 6 arrests for every police officer injured happened in 2024, and it means about 4 arrests were made for every officer injured in 2020 with Black Lives Matter, which is a rate of about 2 more arrests per injured officer when it was the 2024 disorder, which is actually evidence towards two-tier policing existing, but anyway. The evidence to our current inquiry, Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist told us one of the common characteristics of policing protests is you have to protest and counter-protest, and almost invariably one group will think you've gone too far and the other group will think you've not done enough. Okay, but these are 2 completely separate times. What are you talking about? Indeed, shortly after the 13th of June Okay, we're going back to then, that's fair enough. Counter-protest mirroring later complaints regarding 2024 disorder, Catherine French, the then Chief Executive of Stopwatch, a charity campaigning for accountability in policing, told the Home Affairs Committee that we had far-right come out in London at the weekend. I did not see the police adopting a heavy-handed approach as they did in the Black Lives Matter protest. Excuse me? You didn't see the police adopting as heavy-handed an approach they did during Black Lives Matter? Are you crazy? Just by the arrests alone, it's quite mad. The feeling from the community is when the far right are out, they're allowed to get away with what they want. Incredible. I'm sorry, but we have literal data that we've just gone through that shows that that is total nonsense. Why are you taking that? Why are you quoting that? Why are you taking that seriously? I mean, maybe the next paragraph debunks it, who knows, but I doubt it. This is why it's good to go through the report, because while we can all assume that the report is going to be biased, it's good to see the details of how they are actually biased. And this has to be the umpteenth report I've gone through that will give me statistics that directly contradicts the report's findings, and then will quote people effectively saying, oh, from what I see, actually I agree with what this report's conclusion is, completely ignoring the data we actually have, which would be remarkably embarrassing if we lived in any sort of country that gave any sort of fig about being accurate, but unfortunately we're being led by idiots and have been for some time. Again, all this report is trying to do is say, oh, the police, that thing that we're all in charge of, yeah, they're actually doing a really good job. It's Anatomy of the State by Rothbard. Effectively, each arm of the state is trying to cover each other and effectively mark their own homework, and obviously when you're marking your own homework, it's all going well. Again, the biggest issue I've had with data being completely the opposite to the conclusion of a report is the Ed Miliband marking his own homework report that said, oh, if we go down our net zero route, we actually have cheaper electricity. It turned out that's only the case if Russia end up invading Poland. In every other scenario, i.e. not the worst case scenario, it's cheaper to just carry on doing what we're doing with oil and gas and things like that. So it's just incredible. Anyway, let's finish this section off. In the case of the summer disorder, police forces were very clear that the key factor determining their response was the level of violence on display, which there was a fair amount of. Chief officers acknowledged both their responsibilities to facilitate protests and the difficulty inherent in policing protests, but were categorical that these considerations were not relevant to the case of violent disorder. Chief Constable Noble stated his force was dealing with thugs and criminals who were trying to kill police officers, set fire to buildings, and commit serious criminal offences. All those three things are true, by the way. That was absolutely happening. But again, the question has to be asked, what did Lucy Connolly did and that care worker who called some people tramps do? Like, what were they doing? Was that a serious criminal offence? Well, Chief Constable Carrington was clear that when we see violence, when somebody throws a punch, throws a bottle, tries to smash up a mosque or a community centre or a citizen, that is not a protest. I would agree. Assistant Commissioner Twist told us of his concerns that two-tier police can become a bit of a catchphrase for people who want to criticise without meaningfully engaging. Well, here I am meaningfully engaging, so that doesn't work for me. Similarly, Chief Constable Webster said that accusations of two-tier policing have a negative effect on my officers and are unhelpful. Okay, fine. I am fine giving them negative effects when they are doing a bad job. Yes, that is fine with me. Do you want to know what would give them a positive effect? Actually policing the other side of these things, you know? Yeah, arrests were made at Black Lives Matter protests, but as was shown, there was an awful lot of disorder there, and frankly, they admit the scale is the same, although the violence wasn't the same scale, to be fair, but you'd expect a rate that was closer to the 6 people arrested for every officer injured rather than the 4. Again, doesn't really help with your defence of two-tier policing. On 2nd of September, the Home Secretary accused those making claims of two-tier policing of wanting to legitimise attacks on the police and calling them wrong. No. We want people who attack the police arrested, no matter the colour of their skin. Again, there was an entire bar that was raided by a whole bunch of people who were, let's say, not part of the larger wide-scale disorder that was happening with attacks on police. And as far as I can tell, I can't find a single article that says anyone was arrested for that. That is two-tier policing. It's not people don't want people arrested for being violent to the police. It's people want more people arrested for violence. That's what it is. So in conclusion, based off all of this very one-sided argument with data that doesn't back up their claims, the right to protest is fundamentally in our democracy, and we would take seriously any evidence that peaceful protest was being suppressed based on the political views expressed. They've completely turned it upside down. This isn't the issue. The issue isn't that peaceful protest is being infringed upon, it's that violent disorder is being allowed with certain groups of people, which we saw with our own eyes was happening. They've completely turned it upside down, and this is how they're trying to defend it. By ignoring all of us saying, you're not arresting violent people, and saying, oh, we didn't actually infringe on peaceful protests because they were being violent. Okay, that very well might be true, but you're ignoring a whole half of the argument that people are actually making. However, we see no evidence that this was the case during the summer. Far from being evidence of two-tier policing, the police response last summer was entirely appropriate given the level of violence criminality that was on display. Yeah, I would agree. However, you ignored further violence going on with other groups. That is the issue. It was disgraceful to see unsubstantiated commentary about two-tier policing undermining the efforts of police officers who serve bravely in the face of violence. Again, the individual officers, they're doing a fine job. It's fine. Like, well done. But you've really got to get it in your heads. You have to be like that with everyone. Otherwise, people are going to make these claims and they are going to stick. And they still stick. Two-tier here is still being used by Robert Jenrick and Reform and a whole load of other right-wingers. Because it is true. That is why it is sticking. And it's quite funny because it's not entirely Keir Starmer's fault. You know, an awful lot of this has happened under the Tories' watch as well. So two-tier policing is just a catch-all phrase, and really it is blaming on-the-ground policemen more than anyone else, when the fact of the matter is that this is a judicial issue, this is a parliamentary issue, this is an issue with police and crime commissioners. It's people at the top that are causing these problems, so yeah, they're having a negative effect, and maybe they don't want to be police officers anymore, and, well, that would probably be a bad thing, because we do need a police force. But at the end of the day, something has to be done about this, because a report being this disingenuous is not going to quash the accusations of two-tier policing. It's not going to work. Anyway, after this report has come out, I have only seen one person in the political class comment on it. Guess who that is? Nigel Farage. I do not accept it. Nigel Farage launches blistering attack on Southport Riots report after finding no evidence of two-tier policing. Despite the fact, as we just went through, there was evidence. It might not be great evidence, but the numbers that we have just gone through is evidence, believe it or not. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has hit out at the findings of the report into the summer riot sparked by Southport attack, declaring he does not accept there was no evidence of two-tier policing. The report, released by the Home Affairs Committee, details the probe into the police force's response to the disorder, and we've just read through it. It concluded that those participating in disorder were not policed more strongly because of their supposed political views, but because they were throwing missiles, etc., etc. Yeah, but again, Black Lives Matter, they were doing that too, and they were arrested at a lower rate. Hitting out of the report, Farage told media that there is a strong feeling in Britain of not only two-tier policing, but two-tier justice. Farage fumed, I do not accept the findings of the report whatsoever, not just two-tier policing, but two-tier justice. There are people who said very unpleasant things in the heart of the moment on Facebook, going to prison very, very quickly. Others on the other side of the argument, shall we say, not being treated in the same way. Highlighting the fallout of the Manchester Airport altercation with police, Farage added that there is still a strong feeling of two-tier policing, and he is not convinced by the findings of the report, and I completely agree with him. And again, this is the only political figure I can find saying anything about it to this effect. I've not seen anything from Jenrick yet, and it's been 2 days. And Jenrick's typically all over this sort of thing, with the sentencing council nonsense. He was all over it from day one. I've not seen anything from him today. From what I can see what is going on today, he's talking about the issue with prison officers being attacked by, well, most recently, the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber, and advocating that prison officers get stab vests. All good stuff, but realistically, we have the actual government telling us that two-tier policing doesn't exist, and one of the big activists of two-tier policing and justice doesn't have anything to say on it. I find that really odd. As I say, I'm only seeing this from Farage. Farage stated, just think, a few weeks before we had the Manchester Airport attack, and those prosecutions took many, many months to come through. I promise you there is a strong feeling and perception of two-tier policing and two-tier justice in this country, and nothing this report says convinces me. And I would agree. Literally, all they've had to say is people were arrested for throwing missiles and stuff at police and committing arson. It's completely ignoring the fact that there were an awful lot of people arrested for social media posts that in some cases were incredibly stupid, and ignoring the fact that absolutely none of this happened with people like Nick Lowe's, who was spreading misinformation as well. It's just ridiculous. In fact, as well, that Labour councillor talking about slashing people's throats. He's had his trial. He's had his trial delayed until August. He was due to stand trial this week, which this was in January, but the case is now delayed until August. It's amazing, isn't it? Two-tier here. Oh, we're going to rush through absolutely everyone who was encouraging violence, but one of our own councillors who said, let's slash fascist throats? Yeah, no, we're going to delay that. There's no rush for that. Honestly. We are being told to pull the wool over our own eyes. I refuse to do it. This is one of the most absurd findings I think I've seen from a public body, and I've seen Ed Miliband marking his own homework. Asked by the media if he would thank the police who faced violence of the riots last summer, the Reform UK leader affirmed that it was deeply unpleasant for the officers to experience the unrest, with many left injured by demonstrations. Farage declared, "Of course I thank the police for their work that they did during the riots, and they had a very, very hard time, many injured, and it was deeply, deeply unpleasant." However, Farage made clear that the riots were sparked because of a vacuum of information regarding the Southport attack, identified later as Axel Rudagabana, and as we went through in the report, they agree with that. Farage concluded, "This happened because there was a vacuum. It happened because they were not told the truth about the identity of the attacker, who was under 18 at the time, so that's why they do it, apparently." Though, of course, that was overturned by a judge very quickly. "I made a plea 24 hours after the horrendous murder and said, for goodness sake, tell us who it is, tell us the truth. And I think the big lesson is that ought to be learned from all this." Yeah, again, I would largely agree with that. We absolutely should have been better informed about this whole thing, and yet we weren't, because I guess they were worried about what the outcome would be, and it turned out they made a worse one. And then they overcompensated by putting a woman in jail for 31 months for a ridiculous Facebook post, and yet, as I say, Labour MP suspended sentence for a 10-week jail sentence for assaulting his own constituent. And of course, Labour councillor at the time slashed people's throats. Oh no, will delay his trial. Incredible, really, isn't it? We're being told there's no two-tier justice, and yet here we are being shown direct evidence of two-tier justice. Anyway, it's a shame, but it looks like this Labour government is not anywhere near good enough to actually deal with the issues that are being put forward to them. Though that would have been pretty obvious to anyone who was paying attention to anything for the past, well, century, to be quite frank with you. And now we live in a world where everyone's trying to cover up the fact that we have a completely incompetent bunch of people in charge, because the homework was marked by the incompetent people in charge. Anyway, I think with that, we'll leave it there. So, tonight, there is a Tosh Talks on the way the deep state works, so I was going to say go over to the Worcester Club for that, but unfortunately I'm still not able, for some reason, to get my OBS to connect to it, so we'll be doing it on this channel again. But I will unlist it and move it over to the other channel when I can, and I've just realised I've completely forgotten to do that for the last Tosh News, but I will do that today. There will also be Laughing at the Guardian on Thursday, as it's Holy Week, so I'll kick off Holy Week with some fun and games with some certain people. One special guest hopefully will be able to make it from Twitter, who is known for posting non-stop bangers, so do come along to that. Videos out as and when I can make them. If you want to help out the channel, do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment as well. If you want to help a bit more directly, do become a channel member, or leave a super chat and super thanks. Those are great ways to help the channel. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today, so once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.